Okay, but you're also doing therapy on the person themselves, right?
Yes.
And so you're talking to the ETs and you're dealing with the person. So your subject matter has to also relate to that human being that the ET's coming through, isn't that right?
Yes, because they will explain what they have done to the person, why they have done it, and then by the time the person wakes up, they'll say, well, if that's what happened, I can live with it. Most of the other therapists work in the emotional level, just only frightening because they don't understand what's really happening. They told me the ideal situation should be that the person never remember anything about the experience because they have been coming since the beginning of the earth, taking care of humans since the beginning of the earth. And they don't want to interfere with the individual's life. We should, because of free will, we should be allowed to just live and experience life as we know it. Not supposed to interfere with it. But they said because the chemistry of the brain has changed, the pollutants in the air, the additives to the food, if the person is on drugs of any kind, recreational or medical drugs, if they are drinking on alcohol, it changes the chemistry of the brain. Mm-hmm. Thus, when the person remembers an experience, they don't remember it all. Usually it's parts of an experience or a dream. They are remembering the experience in a distorted fashion. So it's not correct. And that's why they're scared. They think they've been raped. They think all kinds of horrible things have happened to them. And this is what the ET community, UFO community, they exploit that. They have speakers come and talk about all the horrible things that were done to them. Well, I can have the same person that somebody else has got this horrible story from. I do them, we get a totally different story because we find out what really happened. And it's not at all what they thought it was. Because of the chemistry of the brain filters the experience. That makes a difference.
Okay. And perhaps you are also, because you're the receiver, right, on a certain level, so you have a certain openness to accept whatever might come, rather than to preconceive or have a...
But see the therapy for the person. Some of them are afraid to go out of their house after they work with other therapists. They're afraid to go anywhere because they're afraid to go to sleep. And when you find out what really happened, that's therapy. And that's what I work with.
Okay, but you're working with MyLab individuals that have been military abductions. You're familiar with that?
I've never done the military abduction.
You've never had any exposure with that?
In 25 years, I've never had anyone that had anything to do with the military. Other people say they have, but it's interesting that mine have never been that way.
Okay.
It's always been, they don't like the word abductions. They prefer to call it visitations. It's always been people that had problems. And they had partial memories, and they knew something had happened. They had missing time, and condensed time is much more exciting than missing time.
Okay, so let's talk about the future of the Earth and what kind of waves have been coming, because there have been, there are people on the planet, as you mentioned in your lecture, and I think a lot of people can go online and get other lectures that you've done and so on and so forth. But why don't we talk about the waves and then what's coming in the future?
Because I have found everything from how the Earth was created to how they began life, and they did begin life and start us. And they've watched over us all the time, all the way through. But it's interesting that I've never found the military abductions.
Yes.
The military might be involved, but I haven't worked with those kind of people. But let's go back a minute. You were talking about the different races. I've had many different ones come through. Some of them you wouldn't even recognize. They're not any pictures you've ever seen. But they're able to communicate because it's mind to mind, but they speak through the person I'm working with.
Sure.
And I have information that I can tell you that you wouldn't believe, but you want to focus on this other.
Well, okay, we'll be happy to hear some of the information I wouldn't believe, if that's what you think.
Well, whatever. I don't know where you want to go.
Yeah. Well, I'd like you to talk about, because you started off, you kind of ended your lecture yesterday, basically with the 3 waves and then the future of the planet, and then we can kind of go back to some other things after
There's
that.
one part, can I say it before I forget it?
Sure.
Because I had one that was on a craft that happened outside over California coast, and she was taken out, the car and all was taken up into the craft.
Mm-hmm.
And she had no memory of any of this. But when the person, the ET, came through, was explaining what was happening while they were working on her, he was saying that with their minds, the big eyes they have, and I was wondering how they see. He said, from where I am now, they were in the craft over the highway. He said, we can see all the way out to the ocean. We can see all the way back into the mountains. We can see all the way down either side of the highway. And we can see all the people in the little boats and all the people in the cars on the highway and all the people in the houses all at the same time. That's how they perceive.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful.
It's not at all the way we would think it.
That's right.
And they see what they're thinking. And when they were with the person, the little grays were all crowded around her giggling, and they said, you know what they're looking at? I said, no. They said, they're watching all of the veins, how the blood is flowing through the veins. They could see inside of her, and how all the little things were working with the brain, and the fluids were operating in the body. They could see all of that by looking inside the person's body. It's not at all what you think it is.
I understand.
That's the kind of thing I find fascinating anyway.
Uh-huh.
Okay. But with the three waves, you've got to understand that they created life on Earth.
I understand
They
that.
have been taking care of us since the beginning of time. Therefore, they monitor everything that we do. They watch us constantly because we are part of the records that go into the history book in the council. They have histories of every planet. Everything that happens is in the history book. So they have been monitoring everything that happens on Earth all that time. And whenever something is needed for Earth, some kind of a new invention or a new energy, a new power, it is given to us.
Mm-hmm.
But yet we have free will, and they do have the directive of non-interference. You cannot interfere with a developing civilization. Now, I know that's Star Trek, but it's not fiction, it's real.
I think that most people will actually know that because they know that we're on the brink of a complete change on the planet.
They would always give us the next thing that we needed in the growth of a civilization. And I asked them, isn't that interference? They said, no, because we give it to you as a gift when you need it in that time. What you do with it is your own free will. And most of the time what they give it to us for, we don't use it. We turn it into a weapon or something negative. So I said, can't you just come back and tell the civilization you're not doing it correctly? They said, no, because that is interference.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to just watch and shake their heads. People, you have free will, you can do what you want with it, but you're not doing what we intended you to do with it. So that's what leads up to the three waves.
Okay.
Because they were monitoring us all this time, shaking their heads, thinking, what in the world are they doing with all of this? And then at the end of the World War II, 1945, when we dropped the atomic bomb, that really got their attention. They said, we better get down there and see what these kids are up to. And when they came in, saw what we were doing, they said, it's not time. We were not supposed to have that energy yet. That was not in the timeline. Whenever we were supposed to receive atomic power, it was supposed to be used for peaceful purposes and not as a weapon. And it was not intended. So when they discovered we had done that, they knew they had to do something to help with it, because otherwise, they said we could destroy the Earth. Earth was not developed enough. We're still too cramped into karma, on the wheel of karma. Mm-hmm. And we can't handle anything like that. So they said, the Earth is not ready. So they went back to the councils and were talking about it. What are we going to do? Because these kids can't handle it. They will destroy the Earth. See, the only time they can interfere is if we would get to the point of destroying the Earth. Then they would have to stop us, because if we destroy this one little tiny planet here, it can have reverberations out through the solar system, out through the galaxies, and through other dimensions. And it would cause all kinds of havoc. So they said that could never be allowed. That's the only time they could ever step in and stop us.
Okay.
So they didn't want to do that. So if you remember, at the end of the 1940s is when the UFO flight began. Mm-hmm. That's when we began to see more and more, because they were coming and watching and seeing what we were doing. So there are councils. There are councils over solar systems, councils over galaxies, councils over universes. There's definite rules and regulations about everything that happens with the galactic community. It's not random. So they went back to the council and they were very upset. They said, what are we going to do? We can't just come in and say, stop it, interfere with them. Mm-hmm. So they said there was a lot of discussion, and they came up with what I thought was a brilliant idea. They said, we can't interfere from the outside, but what if we could influence from the inside? And that was what they decided to do. Because the people on Earth were caught up in karma. They were not going to be able to make advancements, not going to be able to move forward. So the idea was to bring in pure souls, souls that had never been on Earth, souls that had never accumulated karma. And where are they going to get these souls from? So that's when the call went out, the call for volunteers. Come and help Earth. Earth is in trouble. And now when I'm doing the sessions in the last 2 years, everything has changed. Now these people have been coming since the late 40s, early 1950s. They've been coming into the Earth, but they don't know what their purpose is. And they look like everybody else. They're totally human beings. They have their problems. They're not ETs. They don't have antennas. But they have ET souls. That's the difference. That's what people have a hard time understanding. Because your soul, you know, is not just in a human body. It can travel. We evolved in ETs. We evolved in other dimensions. Mm-hmm. And we just continue going from body to body. So that's what people don't understand. It's not just life on Earth. So the call went out for volunteers to come and help the Earth. Earth is in trouble. So now when I'm doing the sessions, it used to be they would always go into a past life, and we would find the answers to their problems in the past life. Mm-hmm. Now the only time they go into a past life is if they have karma to be repaid and problems to work out with their families. But instead, I'm getting people who go back to the source, which is God, mm-hmm. and have never been on Earth before. They never left God. Or they're going back to where they lived on other planets, or spaceships, other dimensions. And so they don't go into past lives. The session I just completed today was another one.
Oh, uh-huh.
I just came from Hawaii. The demonstration I did for the class in Hawaii was the same thing. So it's happening more and more with the people I work with. And for instance, well, I talk about the ones that come from God. Uh-huh. Because it's not all ETs. When they go back to God, it is always such a wonderful, beautiful experience. They can't even find words for it. They are there. That's where we all began. We all started with God when we started on this journey. We were all together. And the togetherness was wonderful. It was full of love. And when they describe it, it's beautiful. Sometimes they begin to vibrate, shake.